We're unmuted. We did it. Check this out, everyone.
We're awesome.
Welcome to the seamless but high production quality Azure Functions live webcast. We are here with some of the Azure Functions team. I am Jeff Holland. I'm a program manager on the team and joined today by...
And I'm Eduardo Laureano, another PM on the team. And
Yeah.
super excited. This is like high production stuff.
I know. I almost feel like we should give everyone a tour. This is the Channel 9 podcast studio. So we decided we had enough following. We've got enough viewers that they said, hey, you know, let's get started with a better room. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm actually looking at the chat. Oh, hold on. Maybe you can't hear me. Nope.
Ooh.
Oh, you know what?
We'll make sure.
We're on a different, hold on, watch this. We're in a different stream. I think we're broadcasting here. I'm in a different link that does show me. So we need to get everyone here. So everyone come join this one. Hopefully you're here. Okay, you can hear me, Joel. Asavri's here. Okay, we just had the wrong link. That's fine.
And
yep.
You haven't missed much yet. We're just getting started and getting set up.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll just tell Oded to update the link. We're in a different link, but we're live. All right, so now we're started. It's only 11:08, so we have 2 minutes left to give you all of our updates. Apologies for the hiccups. As you can tell, we're in a new fancy studio here, so we'll just get started. We want to go over what's new. We want to cover some of the important announcements. You may have heard that there's a huge release going out shortly, starting I think tomorrow for V2.
Yeah, it's exciting. The team has been working like crazy to get this, and people are really excited to see our functions runtime V2 coming together. So
yep. So we'll cover that, and then we'll give a little sneak preview for some of the goodies happening next month at Ignite. So starting right into it, then we'll actually jump right in. Eduardo, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about ServerlessConf, which we just got back from.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. So some of you might have heard that's probably the biggest serverless conference we have, and happens different places in the world. In the past, happened in Austin, New York, Paris, Japan. So this time was the first time they had ServerlessConf on the West Coast. So it was in San Francisco, and this conference gets better every year. Really have to give kudos to A Cloud Guru organizing it. And all the big players on serverless are there, right? Like we obviously are there as Microsoft and Azure, but you would have all the other cloud providers there as well as customers and people in the ecosystem that build tools and solutions on serverless. So just for some of you that might not have been there, just do a quick recap. The way the conference went is right at the beginning. I think Tim Wagner did a great job talking about serverless economy, how in the long run, when you have serverless instead of dedicated machines, how you can actually run your machines hotter, and you can make the most out of your hardware, which is good for companies to save money. It's good for the environment, and you know
That's right. He did talk about the environment, which I liked,
which was great. And what's also great is second talk was security. So I feel like serverless is more mature now. We talk about like how to combine serverless with your development process, how to make sure security is there, not only networking security but encryption and all the other aspects of security. What's your responsibility versus what's the cloud provider responsibility. So, and the third spot, still in the morning, we're single track. We had wonderful talk. Our own Jeff Holland went there. He showed his love for functions, replaced a picture of his baby for a functions logo.
Don't tell my wife. My real baby, Azure Functions.
But that was great because Jeff was able to do a lap around functions. He went from our developer experience. We got a lot of applause when he showed functions running in VS Code. So VS Code team, if you're watching, like kudos to you guys as well. But then he went into things that if you do serverless, you still have to worry about, like unit tests, integration tests. How do you actually build and ship your code to production? So we showed like VSTS and the DevOps pipeline. Also went a little bit into durable functions, which was a big hit.
Yeah.
Something I think we're really differentiating now. It's both durable functions and logic apps. And in the end, showing how functions can run in so many places. He had a really cool, fun demo with functions running on a Raspberry Pi, so IoT device. So that was a great start of the conference. After that, immediately, and that was like lunchtime or something, people were piling up on our booth to really know the cool technology, what Microsoft has been up to. And we demoed functions, durable logic apps, and the stuff that Jeff talked about. On the second day, we had another talk where we doubled down on durable, where Yohai showed his messy code, which is a bunch of line like if then else that like cascades down, that almost falls to the right of the screen, and showed how you can replace that code that probably wouldn't work in a function that can only run for 5 or 10 minutes. How you can replace that with a durable function, and the code looks so slick, and it can fit in like 5 or 6 lines of code. So he showed like what are the patterns and anti-patterns in serverless, and that went really well. And then we had another session by Asavri also talking about durable and how to use it, and went further deep into that. And all went very, very well. I think people are super excited. The overall feeling we all had as a product team there is that people now see that Microsoft's doing a lot of exciting stuff across the board, really. Aside from that, I think some themes that are new this ServerlessConf compared to last year is, in the past, talking about serverless with containers and Kubernetes was almost blasphemy. It was like, you're either serverless or you're a containers person. You can't be both of them. And this time, we talked about it, as you probably know. If you don't know, try it out. We have an offering that functions runs on Linux. We have custom container images where you can bring your own custom container. And then Google also talked about that, how they have container offerings. So, and open source was a big deal. There's huge community behind Kubernetes and OpenFaaS and all that, and how we can combine all these technologies together. So that was something I think was very interesting for me to see. And in the end, what we got excited is, although the hype on serverless probably started 2 years ago or so, it's still going. I think we're still, in some senses, in the beginning days of it. The last point I want to make is the enterprise that came, Verizon and Capital One were there and say, hey, when we try to use serverless on an enterprise, there are challenges. There's maturity in the set of technologies that serverless has that still has to happen for enterprise to really adopt it. So they mentioned things like networking security that they have to have, encryption, and some other aspects. So it was really cool to also have this down-to-earth perspective of, hey, it's really cool what we're doing. There's a lot of work ahead that we have to do. So those are sort of...
It's a good recap. The big themes,
of what happened there. I don't know if you had something that you observed.
No, I think that covered it really well. It was a great conference. It was a really good opportunity. And we're excited to share even more goodies at the Microsoft conference coming up was at Ignite, which we'll preview in just a second. So the next part that I want to go into is talking about some of the updates that are coming. And there's one specifically that it's extremely important that everybody is aware of. So I'm going to paste this in here. This is a link to an announcement that hopefully you've seen. This is a update that is rolling out. If you are using Azure Functions in V2, this is a huge update that we have made that is going to introduce breaks to existing apps. So if you have any V2 apps today, even if they're in a dev environment, but you don't want them to be impacted, this GitHub issue that I just pasted in the chat, and I'm showing here at this repo that you can hopefully read up here, has all of the information you need on what you can do to avoid being impacted. So I want to give a little bit of a background on this change and what it means, because there's been a few questions. So the first thing, why are we breaking things, which we never like to do? So one of the benefits of being a preview service is that we can iterate and make changes based on feedback from the community. And one of the things that we constantly get feedback about, even in these webcasts, is it's really hard the way that the host deals with dependencies against things like Azure Storage or JSON.NET, because as a developer, if I want to use my own version of Azure Storage or JSON.NET, I get assembly resolution conflicts, and people are like, well, what about binding redirects and this, that, or the other? Yeah. So our team has been working extremely hard over the last few months even to completely revamp the way that dependencies are managed of the Azure Functions host. And this impacts both C# functions and other languages in terms of how dependencies are loaded. The good news is we're releasing this now. But the bad news is because there's so many changes, it will be impacting the people whose functions were written loading in dependencies the old way. So once this update goes out, for significantly, as far as I know, virtually every environment and every scenario, you shouldn't be able to run into issues where an assembly version is conflicting against one in our host because of how we're going to be managing assemblies, whether it's Azure Storage or JSON.NET or whatever.
And we should add, like, it was really cool, like with the webcasting community, for them to provide feedback, which was very detailed. Like, here's the exact library that we're having conflicts. Like, people had like the JSON.NET library, they had conflicts, or storage SDK, as you mentioned. So we really appreciate, like, everyone that's listening on webcast, that you provide this feedback as you use our preview products like V2. But we listen, and we're doing all these dependency injection changes now. But yeah, it comes with the breaking change.
Exactly. So I want to just show, so to give you an example, like here's a function written in V2, and this is written to use the IoT hub trigger. Now, whether you know this or not, depending on the language, in order for that to work, we're actually pulling in this NuGet package here, which is an extension, in this case, IoT triggers powered by Event Hubs. So I have the Event Hubs version. So what the action that's actually going to need to take place is we're going to start this release, and you can delay your update by following those instructions. Sometime next week, we're going to release new versions of all of these packages. Okay, so there'll be a new functions SDK, there'll be a new version of every single extension, and there'll be a brand new storage extension that enables us to treat storage as an external extension dependency. So what you're going to need to do is open up your app, and this would be the same for JavaScript or Java. Make sure that you update all of the extensions that you're using, either through the func extensions install command or through NuGet if it's C#. And then you can go and opt into the update in the cloud and publish your changes. So that's what's changing, as all these dependencies are going to get versioned. You have a way to lock yourself to the current version. You don't have to change your code. Nothing about the code is going to be impacted. Nothing about the signature or the documentation. It's strictly these versions that I'm showing here on my screen. So hopefully that clears things up. If you're not using extensions today, if you just have like an HTTP trigger or a timer trigger, those don't have external dependencies. You actually won't be impacted.
That's true. Are you going to cover a little bit on the timeline of the changes?
Sure. Yeah. So we're planning. We release over like a week period, so we don't like blast an update to all apps at one time. So it'll gradually roll across all apps over the span of about a week. The goal is right now to start tomorrow sometime and hit the first few apps. So make a change now if you need to. We've been sending out notifications. If you're one of the subscriptions we can see will be impacted, there should be an email that's being sent out very shortly too. Lots of good ways to get notified, obviously, this webcast. So I hope that clears things up on, like, you don't have to make any changes to your code. You're just going to need to make changes to the packages that it references for extensions. And this is a great thing. This is the last planned update that will be breaking for V2 before we GA. So after this one, we've got a few more releases coming, but they're nice fit and finish things because we're in the final stretch now of V2 before it becomes the generally available and default runtime.
Yeah, no, we're super excited to be close to the finish line. And yeah, the breaking change was the last thing first declare, and what we're going to do is once we go generally available, then we're going to maintain everything you have working. So here's when you have to make those changes. And I think on the announcement, it clarifies if you don't want things to be broken, you can pin your version to the current version and wait for the right time to revert back to the latest. So you can do it with minimum impact to your applications.
Yep. And the last thing, I know this was asked a few times on Twitter, but before we go into some of the stuff that's planned, and I will do a short demo on DevOps because on Twitter, that's what we voted for. If you're running V1 today, and like I'm saying, hey, we're in the final stretch of V2, what does that mean for your apps? This is a very common question. I think there's actually a GitHub issue that is in the discussion alias of this breaking change that addresses this. We're going to continue to support V1 for production workloads for a significant amount of time. I think the issue even says, like, I don't know if it gives a timeline, so I'm afraid to say one here. Read the issue in GitHub. You're not going to have to rush to update. Like, it's not going to be, hey, V2 is now the default version, V1's no longer supported. We're going to give you a really big window. V1's still great. It's still production supported, so don't worry about that. Again, check out the discussion alias. I don't want to say anything in this forum that's going to get me in trouble when I get back to my office.
But the only thing I think is worth noting is some of the new things we're going to be developing as new features and engineering improvements. Some of them will light them up in V2.
Absolutely.
So it's worth noting, like, we recommend you go to V2 if you can, because that's where we're going to spend most of the new engineering efforts on.
Yep. And even today, like after this last change, since this is the last big one, if you're starting a new function project today, I would say start in V2. And if for some reason we're not GA'd when you need us to be, send me an email. But this is the right time to start using V2. But this should solve, and again, I mentioned this briefly before, and it's a complex thing. You should no longer run into assembly conflicts in your functions in C#. In addition to this change, over the last few months, we've been making updates to V2. In fact, on the binding redirects GitHub issue and on Twitter, a lot of scenarios that were blocked before just work even now. But after this last update, we have our own assembly load context. We have external dependency injection. Everything is built in a way so you should not hit dependency issues anymore, full stop. And if you do, I've been told that there's a theoretical 0.1% scenario that might not work. If you hit that 0.1%, let me know. But as far as I know, we're good. So JSON.NET, Storage SDK, those are the big ones I always hear about. IoT, client, those should all work now in V2. Okay,
awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it was a lot of talking.
You got it out of the way.
All right, let's do a quick demo. So we did do a Twitter poll. Hopefully you're following us on Twitter at Azure Functions. We did a quick Twitter poll to see what you wanted to talk about. And the votes were fairly tied between DevOps and testability, which is something that I personally have been spending a lot of time in. So when we did traveling like to ServerlessConf, one of the things that I like is it gives me time to build stuff at the hotel because I've got like a family at home and 2 little kids. So once I get home from work, I'm swamped by another set of requirements. But when I'm in my nice quiet hotel, I get some time to hack away on things.
Use the GoGo Wi-Fi? Is that when you do your stuff on the airplane?
So I've been recently posting some blogs on my own personal blog that are turning into official documentation around CI/CD. I just want to show you a little bit of it now. So I've actually come into this app I showed earlier. This is a simple function that's triggering from an IoT event. It's actually a button, and it turns on a light bulb. It's kind of fun. I push a button, it turns on a light bulb. One thing I want to call out, for all of your Azure functions, regardless of language, you should be writing unit tests. So I have here a simple unit test, which sends in a fake IoT message, and it makes sure that I'm sending the request to my light bulb. I'm using mocking here. I'm generating my own IoT event. But this gives me a way to run unit tests. You see I actually have 2 of them written. One, I guess one that's mocking and one that's not for whatever reason. So this is worth doing. I have in my personal GitHub, github.com/Jeff Holland. There's a test samples where I actually give unit test samples for JavaScript Azure functions and unit test samples for Java functions as well. The other one that I'll just mention here, because I know the folks watching this webcast are a little bit more cutting edge. There is one other thing that I've been spending some time on, which is interesting, which are what are called end-to-end tests. So these unit tests are nice, but all they're really doing is executing my code in isolation. And what some people also want to be able to do is test to make sure that the Azure Functions client and that all the hooks into the runtime are working as well, so that my code will actually get the event that it needs. So what I have written here, and this code I believe is on GitHub too, called like button, C# button or something. This is an integration test. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to start up the Azure Functions runtime in memory as part of the unit tests. It's going to run through this scenario that I've written. It connects to IoT Hub, and it's actually going to send a message to IoT Hub. And what's cool here is I actually have a wait here. And what it's going to do is it's going to wait for the Azure Functions runtime to pick up that trigger, execute my code, and in this case, I'm waiting for a specific log message. I want to make sure that this GUID that I'm sending shows up in my logs as I expect. So when I run this automated unit test with something like the Test Explorer, it will actually run the Azure Functions runtime as a test, listen for the event, and check the logs to make sure that everything works end to end. I don't need to test this for everything, but it's one last sanity check. In fact, one other thing, I know this might be a little bit complex.
One quick
Go for
question.
it, Eduardo.
What are you using to trigger your tests? Like, is it triggered by a separate event, or they're being run as part of your DevOps pipeline as you're building your project?
Yeah, so it's actually both. So I run this test both in Visual Studio here, and then in VSTS, which I'll show in just a second. It will actually run this as part of my automated build as well. Spin up the Azure Function Host and listen to IoT Hub and wait for the trigger.
So they still listen to an event.
It's the real data. Like there's no mocking in this one. So this is actually listening to real.
Even the tests are serverless.
Sure, even the tests are serverless. The one other thing which is nice here is actually in this test helper I actually have pulled down a specific version of the Azure Functions runtime. So if I wanted to, I could actually grab the version of Azure Functions that has yet to be rolled out publicly and run this automated test on the version of Functions that isn't available yet in the cloud. So this is only really optimized right now for C#. It's something I'm working on. We're hoping to make better tooling and sampling around it, and even potentially hooks so that you could do these integration tests with JavaScript. But it is something interesting. I know that's like a 400 level thing, but based on the people I see in the chat window, they might find that interesting. The last thing before you look at my thing here, I have this so whenever I check code into my source control, whether that's VSTS or GitHub, I actually run an automated, this is a little bit of what Eduardo was asking, I run an automated build and I actually run all of my tests here as well, both my integration tests and my unit tests.
That's fantastic, yeah.
If all my tests pass, then I can go ahead and publish it and even start to release them into like a dev environment, do some checks, and then do a production environment. So this way, whenever I check code or merge a pull request in, I get that validation to make sure that everything's working before I actually push it to production. So I'm not going to go more into that here. Check out, I've written a few blog posts about specifically the unit tests, the build, and the release process on Medium, or if you just like whatever, follow something, maybe they got pasted in. But that's it for that one. So again, there's our demo. Wow.
No, very, very
Should we
cool.
answer a few questions now?
Yeah, and on VSTS, I think there are a few videos also from our Azure CDAs on
that's right.
on DevOps pipeline with Azure Functions. I think Damien has ones worth checking out too.
Yes, there's been a lot of really good content around this. It's a really strong point of Azure serverless, I would say.
One thing we learned ServerlessConf is we just need to, sometimes people still don't know about it, so we're going to make sure we incorporate more into official docs and other places so it's easier to find, but definitely really cool stuff you can do now. Very nice.
Questions, and then we'll give a little teaser for Ignite and let people get on with their days. Do we have questions from the?
We have questions. We can
have
do
questions
and then Ignite. All right, sounds great.
We'll keep people around for the questions, I guess.
Okay, so let's start with the questions. And what about I answer some, you answer some?
Sure.
So
Yeah, I'll let you host it.
Yeah.
You throw them my way, or you answer them yourself. We'll do questions for like 5 minutes, then maybe we'll tease Ignite, and then we can do more after that.
Okay. Let's start here. So the first question we have here says the V2 runtimes, obviously .NET Core. We're on .NET Core 2.1, but not .NET Standard Framework 4.6. So the question is this true? And I wonder, in that particular case, how can I upgrade my existing V1 functions to V2?
Oh, that is fair. Yes. So there is a question, which is a good one, which is if I have an existing V1 app written in .NET Framework 4.7 and I want to move it to V2, because Azure Functions is right now targeting .NET Standard, could I just push it as a .NET Standard thing? And I believe the answer is no, because even though the project template itself targets at .NET Standard, from a runtime perspective, we're still executing your code with .NET Core. Now, this is quite confusing, honestly. It has taken me a number of weeks to try to wrap my mind around the difference between framework, standard, and core. But in general, standard is the set of APIs that span all .NET flavors of that kind of generation. And then each specific one has its own different flavor.
But and just to add that, I think this one is a little simpler, which is there's going to be a set of people that are on V1 using .NET Framework 4.6 or 4.7, and they want to, and we recommend, we just said that, I mean, they go like, we recommend V2 and move to V2, and they're like, oh, how can we do this? So if your application is such that use a set of APIs that you have compatibility and the set of APIs on .NET Core, I think it's worth in your own time to take the effort to switch .NET Core and take advantage of V2. We're going to continue, as we said earlier, supporting V1. So if you for whatever reason you can't move it to .NET Core, you can still run .NET Framework on V1, and we'll keep V1 around for you to run that. But if you can migrate, if you can go into switching those libraries out and using stuff that's on .NET Core, we recommend that because that's where V2 is going to go. And if there is particular, we're willing to listen. If there are particular libraries that you feel like .NET Core doesn't support yet, we can go and engage the .NET Core team to say, hey, is this coming on 2.2 or is this the roadmap?
And honestly, most of the templates we have today are one-to-one between framework and standard. The only one that's a little trickier is HTTP because we have changed the HTTP signature to follow a little bit more of the core stuff. But for a large majority, like if you have a simple queue-triggered function, I would not be surprised if you could straight up copy-paste your code into a V2 function or even just change the project settings and everything would work. So I still need to dig more into this and we're going to get more documentation, but it's a fair question.
All right. And I'll ask another one here. Any ETA on the Open API definition, when the Open API definition will be supported in V2 functions? So
you got this, Eduardo. Yeah.
So actually, I love that. Particularly, I love that Open API feature because I'm not a big fan of either writing my own Swagger or YAML for that matter. But that's a personal opinion. So and it's really cool, the Open API feature for you to do integrations, things that you already have your HTTP APIs written in functions, and you want to surface that elsewhere. The Open API functionality really helps you getting started with that Swagger file. That being said, it's even preview on V1. There are still some issues that we would like to solve to take that to like a general availability level of that functionality. For those of you that use the functionality, you still have some handwriting to do on the Swagger file. We kind of stub it out for you, but there are details you have to fill in. So what we're going to do is what we declare V2 GA is really what we consider general availability, production quality. I think that particular feature needs a little bit more work for it to be in V2 and us to be comfortable putting it there. So this is going to come after we do V2 GA. I don't have a very precise timeline on that feature, but it's in our plans to eventually support it in V2. So that's that. Let me pick next question.
One or two more, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think you mostly answered, but maybe there's something to add. Can you guide on CI/CD for functions?
Yeah, for the sake of time, I would probably say plug on my own personal blog, Turning into Docs, medium.com/@JeffHolland. There's a lot of guidance there. I would check that out.
Yeah. The only thing to add is, as folks know, functions built on top of app service. So if you're, Jeff showed a full-on VSTS pipeline. Some folks, they want something like just connect Bitbucket or GitHub to their to their cloud function and do the CI/CD that way. So that's supported as app service supports it too. So there are other ways that app service and function support CI/CD, but yeah, for sake of time, there's definitely tons of options there. Whoever asked, if you feel like you're not finding the answers, we'll reach out and we'll provide a bunch of links. Cool. All right. So let's see what else we have here. I think you covered a little bit on Twitter, but maybe for rest of folks might be interesting, which is what would be a good approach to load testing and REST API built on Azure Functions. Any specific tools you recommend or guides out there? Any general load testing tips and recommendations are welcome.
Load testing is something that often when you have an HTTP triggered function, people are like, what does this look like under load? The biggest one actually, which isn't even necessarily tooling specific, is one thing that will surface very quickly under load tests are things like connection limits that exist for consumption functions today. So a single instance, and we'll scale out to many instances, but a single instance can only have 300 active outbound connections at one time. So one of the benefits of a load test is you'll start to surface if there's parts in your code where under load you might be making more. So doing things like a static singleton HTTP client or reusing connection pooling across executions will really surface. So that's one test, is like use best coding practices. There's a doc called Manage Connections in Azure Functions that follow all of that before you do a load test, or else you're just going to blow up your function. That said, really any load testing tool you want to do, I've run the gamut on my functions. I just did like Apache Bench. I've tried K9 or K6. I can't remember what it's called. Locust, Artillery, VSTS. All of them work. All of them are good. Pick whatever flavor or language that you're most comfortable with. I personally like VSTS the most, but it does have like a minute or two warm-up time before it starts hitting your app, so it's harder to demo. But yeah, that would be the only one there.
Do another one here, and we have someone here that's our time check to know how well we're doing. But I'll keep going until one of you tell me that we're running out of time. So regarding the zip push deployment for time-triggered functions, the GitHub wiki and MSDN docs contradict each other regarding use of the REST deployment API. So I can take that one. Actually, I'll go on a little tangent here. And one thing to know, in case you haven't seen, zip push is one way you can deploy, although we have this functionality called run from zip. It's currently in preview, but they're getting close to being generally available as well. That you should consider using in case that works better for you. The run from zip, the zip push will push your zip up to us and will unpack and upload the file content that's used. The run from zip is actually smarter than that. We'll mount those contents that can be in your storage account or within your functions content, and you can run your functions from there. So prevents you from doing a lot of I/O as you're trying to operate over your function content, and really helps with the performance overall. So I know I did a plug into a different feature.
Sure, yeah, and it should, I'll just do a note here too. You can actually still use the zip push API and just set an app setting, and we'll do run from zip of a zip push.
Awesome.
But I wonder, because it's on timer trigger specifically.
Yep.
So the one aspect that there might be some confusion on, which it depends on the path, and it's likely one of these is actually out of date. With triggers like timer for a consumption function, there is an additional gesture that has to happen. And I've seen a lot of chatter about this one, so I'm going to take the time to clarify it, and I think this might be the root of this question. There's an additional gesture that happens called syncing your triggers. So if you think about it, you're publishing this timer-based trigger, but you might scale to 0. And if you don't have any instances around anymore, when that timer goes off, there's going to be nothing around to listen to it. So we do something which is called syncing your triggers, which lets our central scale service know, hey, this person has a timer and it's going to go off again in 5 minutes. And so that if you're scaled to 0, we'll wake something up for you. Some of our deployment options in the past did not sync your triggers. So you could have published something through a REST API, but if you didn't do an additional sync triggers action, you might have timers that never fire. That said, at this point, the only published options that don't sync triggers that I'm aware of is FTP deploy and some other, like editing the files through the file system in Kudu manually. But in terms of using zip deploy or run from zip or MS deploy or VSTS or Visual Studio, all those other ones automatically will sync your triggers for you. So I'm guessing one of those other docs that you referenced probably hasn't been updated to reflect that. So you should just be able to do zip deploy with this new run from zip thing and be fine.
Awesome. All right. One more here. Was the state of using acronym, it's internal, it's bring your own binding, already discussed? So I guess I can give a quick update on that. One thing that's cool, and I'll explain. So we have the concept of bindings in functions, which is unique to our functions. The other, I don't think the other cloud providers have anything similar, which really helps with your code.
Way to drop that in there.
Yeah, I know. Which really helps like simplifying your code using other APIs. So often we have folks, either completely external folks or other teams at Microsoft that will say, hey, why can't you make a binding that's easy to operate with my service or my APIs, right? And because we're open source, people want to contribute. They want to just write the binding on their own, and we pick it up. So we one thing is we've seen people successfully code their own bindings.
Some really cool ones too.
Some really interesting one. And folks that are not directly on our team. I think Anthony built
SignalR one.
The
yeah,
SignalR,
we're gonna adopt it.
One, which is recent. But what we're gonna do is, I think we need more work to make that easier. I
Yes.
think one thing that's great though is a lot of the work we're doing now, this dependency injection work and all this work we're doing that cause the breaking changes and a smaller runtime will help with that. But we still need some effort to be done in terms of documenting, put a contributors guide out there, things that really help you through how to write your own binding. But yes, we're still very much interested on that and open source contribution in general. We think binding is a really cool thing that we have and we can expand much more. So yeah, we plan to make that story better.
And it still works today. Like there's nothing stopping it. I think the biggest challenge is it's not very well documented and there's some hiccups in the process. Obviously, pieces of it too are going to change after this last V2 release that's coming out this week. But after that, the best you could do if you want to jump on it early is look at, all of the bindings we have today are all open source, so you can kind of reverse engineer them, but it's really on us to do a better job of doing it. But it's something we see value in and we want to encourage. So if you're willing to run through some brick walls and read a few blog posts, you can get pretty far today. All right, let's switch over and plug Ignite briefly. We are about half hour because we started late. So Eduardo, I'll introduce the tease for you, buddy. Tell us about Ignite. What is it? Why should I care?
Ignite, it's probably the second biggest conference at Microsoft. I'm trying to see, I'm going to say it's the biggest conference.
I think attendance-wise, it's actually bigger than Build.
It's
24,000 we're being told. That's a lot.
It's gigantic.
Yeah.
For sizing, instead of using a banana, ServerlessConf has 500 attendees.
Yes.
So Ignite's great, and we always come up with tons of stuff. There are two big moments, or Microsoft conference moments. Build, we always have announcements at Build, and we always have announcements at Ignite. I can't come here and tell you all the announcements, otherwise nobody's going to attend the conference. No, but we have a lot of things that are coming at Ignite. I think, and I have it on that slide, a few of those things. Like, we're going to hit some of the themes that I was mentioning on ServerlessConf. I said ServerlessConf, they talked about enterprise. They talked about security, networking. So we'll have a session dedicated for that. The other one is tons of folks wanting to do machine learning with functions. There are few things, to give a hint, there are few things that stop people from doing machine learning and functions. So we're going to help with those scenarios. We're going to be talking about automation. Tons of folks do scenarios where they already have their workload in Azure, tons of services. They use VM, Service Fabric, and all these other services. How do they automate, like permissions? How they automate, like spinning up instances and things like that between cloud and their own environment. So there are tons of solutions around automation that you can use functions, but you could use logic apps. You can use Azure Automation Runbooks. So we're going to be talking about that. One thing that I'm happy is we're going to have over like 8 different sessions among us and the CDAs and the other teams. This time we have a 400 level session. So similar to this webcast, actually probably even a little deeper. We're going to go into how things really work.
With Fabio too, if you're familiar, like Code Sapien Fabio on GitHub.
If you don't follow Code Sapien, start following him today. So we're going to be there and really going deep on how things
He's my
work.
favorite Brazilian on the team. I just thought I would mention that.
Oh, jeez. Maybe we should.
I'm sorry for interrupting your train of thought.
He's my favorite Brazilian on the team too. So the other thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in, it's all as usual, it's like some companies that are being successful with serverless to tell their story. So it's not us saying this is great for you. It's really someone that's using functions that can tell what the benefits were for them at a large scale. And aside from that, we have a PreDay. So on Sunday, we have activities where you can start using serverless technologies. During the event, we have hack events that happen during the event where you can be hacking on functions. So it's not all about sessions. There's a lot of, you can go to the booth and talk to us. We have all these impromptu meetings where we discuss roadmap and issues, and people come and they ask, or they can complain about features that are not there or anything. So the product team is there, CDAs are there, architects, our folks on CSC
will
be there. MVPs are there. They're an awesome resource because they can be in your community and closer to what you work with, and we're all very excited to engage with folks. So attend Ignite. I think most things are streamed live too, so watch from home if you can't be there in person.
And Eduardo buried the lead a little bit. On Sunday before, there's going to be a PreDay. Eduardo will be there the whole day. I will be there the whole day. A bunch of people from our team, the Logic Apps team, the Event Grid team, the Cosmos DB team. Yep. So I know we feel so close right now, but with this new HD and fancy studio, but we would love to actually hang out with you in person all day. We're actually, some of the questions too, as part of the workshop, I want to run people through setting up a CI/CD pipeline for their function, having that function integrate with Cosmos, connecting to things like Event Grid and Logic Apps. So we're actually going to walk through doing that on your machine together. So if you can wing it, I would really encourage you to check out that PreDay. We've actually had a significant number of tickets already taken. I don't know what the max is, but to drive engagement, I'm going to say we only have a few tickets left, so buy them now.
Yeah. The other thing's important. There's always swag, so this is sort of our new swag.
Yep.
We have like new shirts now and new material. So
People are already asking for them.
Oh, awesome! Yeah. So if you ask Odad or ask Gorka, if you don't know them, ping us and we're gonna point you to them.
Ping Twitter. All right.
Twitter.
So with that, we would like to thank our wonderful staff at Channel 9, Gonaz, for helping us set up our first legit webcast. First of many.
This is so professional.
Isn't it, though?
I feel like we can do Hollywood.
I kind of wish I would have talked in more of a baritone, though, the whole time. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. We do plan on releasing a webcast update during Ignite. It may be pre-recorded. We've got to figure out logistics-wise. But either way, subscribe to this channel, follow us on Twitter, and we'll let you know when the next one's coming so that you can tune in, and we'll answer more of your questions there, too. So thanks so much, everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks for coming.